Welcome to Conversations from the Diaspora. My name is Lila Dejani, and I am putting together a series of interviews with people like myself, Palestinians that live in the diaspora. And before I get into the why I've decided to embark on this project, I just want to give you a little bit of a background. So my father is a Palestinian that was born in Jaffa in 1944, and during the Nakba of 1948, my family fled for safety. Like many hundreds and thousands of Palestinians during that time, nobody left with the intention of not returning. This was always supposed to be temporary. And like many hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, like my own family, they were never allowed to return to their homeland. I can trace back to quite a few generations of my grandparents, great grandparents, great great grandparents that have lived on that land. I am a yoga teacher and a meditation teacher and a practitioner. I have been integrating practices of yoga, wisdom teachings, and transpersonal psychology for almost 2 decades now. And when I think back to how it is that I learn best, when I resonate the most is when I'm sitting with my teachers and absorbing the information because they're told from real life experiences. And I thought how great it would be to have people like myself who have a lot to say and might not necessarily have the platform. Many Palestinians right now are not only fighting to convince people that we have the right to exist, but we're also struggling and battling the media. Unfortunately, the media is not doing its job in reporting what's going on in an integral way. The majority of journalists are doing exactly the same. Not all, but the majority are not doing their job with integrity. And another reason why I wanted to put this together is because as Palestinians, we share the same values and we share a lot of the same stories, but because of the occupation and the colonization and the way that the country has been divided, and then including into that the people that live outside of the land that don't have a right to return, all our stories are in fact really unique. And I wanted to create a space where people can really get a true essence of what it means to be Palestinian. I'm very lucky to know incredible people, and I just want to highlight that this is not political. These are real life accounts, real life stories, and we don't do this work lightly. We have had to be really careful in how we present our information. We have had to be really careful in how much we can offer. So please do keep in mind that whatever we're giving you, we can never give you the full picture. We're just giving you little snippets because we have to keep in mind that some people have families back in the occupied territories, and we want to make sure that we are not putting anyone in danger. Also, it depends where you're from in the diaspora. It's very risky to speak publicly. So we have been quite careful in our wording. For example, not mentioning where people might be from, the exact city, not giving full names, because everything that we do at risk. We want to return to our land. Some of us are not even allowed to visit. Others can visit, so we also don't want to put those in danger that do have a chance to visit. So yeah, please do keep all of that in mind. We do this with a sense of duty for the millions right now that are not able to use their voice. So those of us that are able, we feel the strong sense of wholehearted duty to get these stories out there. And we hope that you gain lots of insight and lots of benefit from listening. Thank you. Hi, Nagam, and welcome. Welcome to this channel, Conversations from the Diaspora. This is our very first episode. It's absolutely wonderful to have you here. I just want to take a minute to thank you so much for your time and for agreeing to do this and sharing some of your stories that I know are incredibly intimate and private. So I thank you for being here.
Thank you, Leila, so much. I know that being on the first episode is a big responsibility and an honor. So thank you for trusting me with the first one, where there's going to be a lot of background and history as well, and sharing of a lot of personal stories for myself.
So if you could just take some time and let us know about your background, where your family was born.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay. So my name is Nagam. In Arabic, that actually means music or melody, the melody in the music. And I'm a Palestinian from West Bank. I was born in Jordan, and my parents left to live abroad when I was just a few months. I can trace back 5 generations of Palestinians in my family with names and locations on both sides of my parents, up to my great, great, great grandparents on both sides. I know where they lived, their names, everything. So it's very, very, I'm very Palestinian on both sides. And I consider myself lucky that I happen to be from West Bank, because, there's always talk of a two-state solution, and West Bank would be included in that two-state solution. However, I cannot say the same for Palestinians that are from the 1948 areas, who may get a state but still not go home. So it's I just happen to be lucky that way. And
it's interesting to say you feel lucky, but at the same time, I'm sure we are constantly tweaking that, because
yes, absolutely,
we also feel lucky not to be in such dire conditions, right?
Yeah. Previously it was, you were lucky if you were from the ones that are living in Palestine, whether in West Bank or in Gaza, or even in the 1948 those very little that are in the 1948 areas. But, after what has happened, it has changed to, you lucked out if you get to live and be outside of our land. So for us, 1948 was our catastrophe, our Nakba, and our 1967 was the Naksa, which is our setback, which, 1948 was, those first cities on the coast. And then our Naksa, 1967, was the remainder of Palestine, the West Bank cities and Gaza. So I'm going to say that both my parents were raised under occupation. They were both born and raised in West Bank. My father actually was born in 1948, but he got to see, the West Bank, like he had some sort of freedom for 19 years before 1967 happened. after 1948, Jordan stepped in and was like, okay, we're going to take guardianship over the West Bank. And for the Palestinians, that was very welcomed because, a catastrophe has befallen them. And for them, when they look at Jordan, they see it as the same people. Prior to World War I, actually, they were a one people. If you look at the Jordan River, it's a very, very thin, small river where, you can cross it walking, waist length water. And if you see how humans, or even just, generally animals behave when they settle around a river, they don't settle on one side and not on the other side. So, they were essentially the same culture. The ones on the west side of the river are more into farmland, and, they have coastal areas. And the ones on the east side of the river were more mountainous, and, the terrain, they have more desert, they have more Bedouin lifestyle. So during those 19 years, my father saw what it was like to be amongst his own and have that freedom. And then when 1967 happened, he also got to see what an occupation means for someone like him. And then many years down the line, after Palestinians, got a little bit more organized, it was in 1988 that Jordan was like, okay, you're good now. We can let you be. From 1967 till 1988, they were helping Palestinians by giving them nationalities, passports, so as they can be given a chance to, move around. They were giving them scholarships for education, etc. And then Gaza, after 1948, got guardianship or help from its brotherly neighbor, Egypt. And, Egypt kept on helping them and under their care till 1967 when the occupation happened. And then Egypt kept on also helping the people of Gaza up until 1978 when they tried to govern themselves. And one thing regarding this is, 1988, we got the PLO, and, Jordan kind of took a step back. And then just a few years down the line in 1993, that's when Palestinians were like, okay, we're going to compromise and we're going to agree to a two-state solution. We get our state, they keep their state. But then, that was not honored. And
Right.
so,
Right. And this
we
was
did
under the
compromise.
leadership of Yasser Arafat.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And even from the Israeli side, people were really upset. The people were upset that this happened. So anyway, we're not going to get into the details of that,
Yes.
but
Yeah.
those are just the dates. My mother so my father was
Sorry,
19.
Naham.
Yeah,
Before you
yeah.
go, tell us about your mother. I'm just curious about when you say my father experienced freedom. I'm curious because freedom is obviously for every Palestinian, whether we're in the diaspora or on the ground, it means something
Yes,
very, very different, right?
yes,
So what do you mean by freedom? Because was he able to move around, or
yes.
like,
So
can
they
you
were,
elaborate a little bit more on that?
yes. So freedom in that sense was, in that context, was you could go from one city to the other within the West Bank area freely.
What
You
about
didn't.
Jerusalem?
You still could go to East Jerusalem, and be amongst your people. You did not have night raids. You did not have fear for your life. You were, you could walk around and not feel like that there's an army constantly around you. There's nobody humiliating you. You could go to school safely. You could study. Of course, there were effects from which we'll get into later of the people that came from the 1948 lands and stayed amongst the fellow Palestinians in those cities. But it was for them, it was a freedom. Like it was still freer than what happened later
Yeah,
on.
yeah, yeah. And for example, for people who had to leave Jaffa, where my family's from, because and I think, something that I want to really point out is I know, for instance, when my family left during the Jaffa massacre of 1948, nobody left thinking that that was it.
Oh,
People left for
absolutely.
safety and they were
Yeah,
taking
and
care of their families and their children. Nobody thought that they wouldn't go back. So that is, and my family is one example out of many. Um,
yes.
but they were never ever allowed to go back.
Allowed to, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And we're gonna revisit this,
Hmm.
later on in this conversation, where we'll just tell the listeners what it was like prior to 1948,
Mm-hmm.
and why people thought they could just leave and come back,
Mm-hmm.
like, for safety and come back, because, you
Mm-hmm.
have to understand how they lived and who was, how was their community, for
Mm-hmm.
you to know that, oh, in that time it seemed like it made a lot of sense to just go for a few days and come back. But we'll definitely revisit this,
Yes. So please,
down the
please
line.
go on and tell us about
Sure.
your mother's side.
So I was just going to say that my mom was 9 when the 1967 Naksa, or our setback, happened. So for my father, he had already formed, like, when you reach the age of 19, you would have already passed that childhood phase. So you're able to make sense and process things that
Mm-hmm.
happen
Mm-hmm.
differently than when you're 9 and it happens, and at that very young age, and what that means for later on. And you'll see that in I always saw it in the difference between how they process things, and how they think of things and react to things.
Mm-hmm.
So I got to see like a 10-year age gap, what, if
Mm-hmm.
someone was younger and someone was older, how did
Yeah,
that
and thank
affect
you so
them?
much for highlighting that because we don't tend to always think on that level when we're just watching the news or hearing
Yes, yes,
stories. Yeah, which
yeah,
is why um, I really wanted to create this channel so that we can really shed light on what it is like to live under occupation and colonization.
absolutely. And then and then what that means for the rest of your life. And it could be like very little subtle things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we were talking about context of their life. We can start with 1948 and then move from that, because later on I know that you want to ask me about the types of
Mm-hmm.
Palestinians, but
Mm-hmm.
before we get to
Definitely.
that,
Mm-hmm.
I need to show context and show you how they lived. Now, this has been going on for such a long time. So obviously, there's a lot of layers and fragments. And for lack of a better word, it's actually, I would call it messy. But I always like to simplify things. And just so as, someone that has no idea, no background, just finds it a little bit simpler. So, but before I can do that, I have to speak to what Palestine was like before 1948. Prior to 1948, we had Christians, Jews, Muslims, Druze, Baha'is, all living in this region, actually, the
Mm-hmm.
entire Middle East. And if you think about it, it makes perfect sense, because a lot of these Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam,
Mm-hmm.
actually started from this region.
Mm-hmm.
So there were a lot of Jews that lived in this region, and when Christianity came, they converted to Christianity. They're still the same people. And then later on, the Muslims, and they converted to
Mm-hmm.
Islam. So it just makes sense that this region has all these faiths, living together
Mm-hmm.
side by side. So we had, because right now we're talking about Palestine, we cannot speak of it without saying, the Jewish community.
Mm-hmm.
The Jewish community was living across the Arab world. So we had a Jewish community in Syria, in Iraq, in Lebanon, Palestine, Morocco,
Mm-hmm.
Egypt, Yemen, and things were absolutely fine. When World War II, ended, and we know that from 1941 to 1945, people were hearing about like the Holocaust. And if you have Jewish people in your community, of course you're going to be mortified and say like, no, like, you can bring the European Jews as well here because we're living with them. Why is there so much hatred? And
Mm-hmm.
so for especially Palestinians, it made perfect sense. This is where they also practice their faith. This place is important to them, just as it is for the Christian Palestinian and the Muslim Palestinian and all the other faiths that are there.
Mm-hmm.
So they were welcoming them and bringing them in. Palestinians at the time had no idea that some, not all, some of the Jewish communities that were people that were coming in, uh, even before World War One to Palestine,
Mm-hmm.
also had some sinister intentions.
Mm-hmm.
They would hear things here and there, but they don't believe it, and they never thought that it has never been done before, where someone takes out a whole community that doesn't follow the same faith in the
Mm-hmm.
manner that it was done. So they didn't know
Mm-hmm.
what they didn't know. So to them, it was very natural and very normal to welcome all these people. And then at the time, Palestine had the British mandate, just like Syria and Lebanon had the French mandate. With history, it was colonization, but we were they called it mandate. So also like for them, the British are here, just like the French are in Lebanon and Syria. Absolutely, whoever comes. They had no idea that there was also they were conspiring, and there are
Yeah.
long-term plans, not short.
That
It's not
yeah.
oh, poor
That there was
things
a
will.
Zionist project happening in the
Exactly. They had
background.
no
Mm-hmm.
idea, no idea.
Mm-hmm.
So this was their world up until November of 1947. When things started to escalate, they were hearing that, there are gangs initially it was gangs, and they are, committing sexual violence crimes. They were doing massacres, and they all started in the smaller villages and the smaller towns
Mm-hmm.
that are part of the governance of the bigger cities.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a lot of talk, a lot of rumors, and then it's they started to hear it's within the Jewish community because it was branded that way. It's not a reflection of the
Mm-hmm.
faith, of course.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, you said you are from Jaffa, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So Jaffa, as an example, had a little area within it, a neighborhood that was called Tel Al-Rabi'. Okay. And Tel Rabi' means Mount of Spring, or the hill of spring, the season. And this area was known to have a majority of Jewish community. You know how it is when you live in cities. You have like that area where the majority are and let's look at the West. They say, oh, this area has a lot of Arab presence.
Right.
This
Mm-hmm.
street, this alley,
Mm-hmm.
so people
Yeah.
huddle together. So Tel Rabi' or Tel Aviv
In Hebrew.
in Hebrew
Mm-hmm.
was within Jaffa. And for people, they're hearing there's Jewish community, but down the street in Tel Rabi' in Tel Aviv, I have my friends, so they didn't really believe, but slowly it started coming closer and closer. And and we know now that they changed all Jaffa's name to Tel
Tel
Aviv,
Aviv,
you know.
yes, yes. And it's
Uh,
interesting because when I talk to people that are non-Arab, that I always say I'm from Jaffa. And I can see this like blank look, and then I have to be like, you probably know it as Tel Aviv or Tel Aviv Yafo.
yeah,
So I do have to always give that explanation.
yeah. So, so
Mhm,
this was like a reflection of their world. And also, there were a lot of people that were from Lebanon, from Syria. There was a lot of trade. They were working. They were going back and forth. They had a relative that's married in Lebanon, and there's somebody who's Lebanese that's living in Palestine, married to a Palestinian. It was all, and actually there were even marriages between Muslims and Jews, and it was a very interconnected, intertwined community. There were no issues. So when they started hearing of gangs, and okay, they could be Jewish, people were like, okay, especially the men. They would tell the women, the elderly, and the children, go to somebody and our friend in this city, and that happened to be Gaza, or go to Tul Karam, or go to
mhm,
Hebron, or go to Bethlehem. It was just one country, or go to Lebanon, or go to Syria to our relative, just for a
mhm,
few days, just until we defend our homes, handle these
mhm.
gangs, and don't take a lot of items. You go
And
temporary, and then you can come back.
yeah, and can you clarify with the gangs? You mean settlers?
So yeah, so at the beginning, nobody knew what was going on. Like they were,
Mm-hmm.
for them, it was like these people that are gangs. But
Mm-hmm.
then, the men that stayed behind and with the intention to defend, quickly found out that, oh, they're actually organized. They're actually under the protection of the our British mandate.
Mandate.
Like, and
Mm-hmm.
and and they have a lot of weapons and advanced weaponry. People there did not have weapons, and if they did, they had something that is very little for like personal use for hunting. Um, just a few bullets, nothing that is as advanced as what they had. So a lot of these men ended up having to choose either, you know, die or try to find a way to follow their families wherever
Mm-hmm.
they went. So it went down very quickly. It was very disturbing for them. And then all these Jewish communities within the Arab world, they, at the beginning, when the state was established in 1948, the state announced and branded itself as we have. Right now we have our own Jewish state. We are calling onto all Jews of the world to come to
Mm-hmm.
Israel.
Mm-hmm.
So naturally, all their Arab, Christian, and Muslims around them were like, why are they talking on your behalf? Are you with this? And because of the atrocities that happened, and the branding, and branding it to be with associated with the faith, a lot of those communities started to feel unsafe, and they were promised an amazing life
Mm-hmm.
in this new state. But then when they went, um, they quickly discovered that they're it's not what they were promised. But
Mm-hmm.
then they were kind of stuck, because if you go back, you how are you going to go back and explain that I'm coming back, and I made a mistake? And if they stay, then they have to um, sometimes be harsher with Palestinians in some situations,
Mm-hmm.
just to show that I belong just as much as
Mm-hmm.
this
Mm-hmm.
European belongs.
Mm-hmm.
So this was the background of that context, and because of that, we got a lot of types. We have a lot of
Yeah,
types
and
of
that was,
Palestinians.
yeah, thank you. So I know you have I've heard you explain the different types and categories of Palestinians, which is
really crucial for people to understand because based on which you call them subtypes, I believe, right?
Yes,
Based on
yes,
which subtype you are, that will determine how you can move around, whether it's in Palestine, in the West Bank, in Gaza, or people like us that are in the diaspora. So if you could
absolutely.
elaborate a little bit more on that.
Okay, so when I first, yeah, at the beginning, like a year ago, I wanted to explain because I was asked, like they hear things like this so and so refugee camp was hit, and it's like a refugee camp inside Gaza. And I actually had Arab friends ask me, like, how come there are refugee camps within Palestine? Like we know there are
Mm-hmm.
refugee camps outside, but why are there refugee camps inside? So at the time when I sat and put the types, I put five. After I shared it, I got a sixth type
Mm-hmm.
because this has gone on for so long. So some types happened straight away. Some types came on to be because of the length of time. So I'm going to start with type one. Type one was people that are from Gaza, have always been there generation after generation after generation. And then you have the people that had family or friends in Gaza, and when our Nakba or catastrophe in 1948 happened, that spur of the moment decision of, let's go stay with my aunt or my friend in Gaza. So those that ended up going and taking refuge in Gaza are the subtype of type one. And they are the ones that eventually had to build refugee camps because they stayed there for the past 76 years and had
Mm-hmm.
kids, and their kids had
Mm-hmm.
kids. So you hear of refugee camps like in Seirat, Jabalia, Khan Yunis, and all these
And
are
I
in
really
Gaza.
want to highlight here, I mean, if you really just pause for a moment and take that in, generation after generation have been born into refugee camps.
Yes, and that's one of the biggest pains for us Palestinians. And it was again a spur of moment decision that I'm going to go to Gaza.
Mm-hmm.
Had your parents decided to go to Gaza or decided to go to West
Mm-hmm.
Bank or decided to
Mm-hmm.
go to Jordan, like each decision, that little decision that you had
Mm-hmm.
to make to save your family
Mm-hmm.
has lifelong and generation after generation
Yeah,
consequences.
absolutely. Repercussions.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So so
Yeah.
so that's the type one. And then we have the type two are the people that are originally from the West Bank cities like Tul Karim, Jenin, Nablus, Nasr, Nazareth,
Mm-hmm.
Ramallah,
Mm-hmm.
Bethlehem, Hebron.
Mm-hmm.
All these cities, there are, people that live there, they're from there. And then you have the people in 1948 that took refuge, supposedly for a few days in these cities. And then because of the length of time that passed, it ended up having to build these refugee camps. So you have the Balata refugee camp, Jenin camp, Nur Shams, El Far'a, like all these different camps that people hear of on the news. These are people that
Mm-hmm.
took refuge in West Bank cities. Back then, it was not West Bank. It was just, I'm just going to go to the next city in
Mm-hmm.
my country.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have the type three, the third type of Palestinians. These are the ones that when 1948 happened, they were just like, you know what? And there were very, very, very few Muslims and Christians. They were like, we're just gonna wait it out. Like, we're gonna hide in our homes. We're gonna try because we have nowhere to go. They didn't think of leaving anywhere. And that happens with any war or any
Yeah, or
situation where
or or even no, this is our home. We're staying.
yeah,
We're
we're
not
saying,
leaving.
and
Hmm.
and I'll tell, like, in when we get to my family, like in 1967 when they came to take to occupy the rest of Palestine, um, because now Palestinians know, like, if I go and to a safer place, I'm not going to be allowed to come back. So when 1967 happened, most Palestinians were like, we're staying and we're going to die. we're not
Mm-hmm.
leaving. So we're not taking refuge anywhere. It's fine because we saw what happened before. Now we know.
Now we
So
know.
we're not go. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
now we know we're not gonna
Mm-hmm.
go anywhere. So in 1948, there were people that said, we're not going to go anywhere. We don't know where this is going. Maybe these gangs, maybe it's just rumors. They maybe didn't see someone because, a lot of the people that left actually had met people that were injured or have lost somebody in these in the actions and the atrocities that these gangs were doing, and it was terrible. I don't think I can even say what was done.
Mm-hmm.
So these Palestinians ended up staying. And because the Zionist project had a long-term plan, they've had years and years of planning, they wanted a few to remain because then it will serve the narrative that everybody else left. They could have stayed, but they chose to leave. So we don't know why they left. They
Right.
just left. They
Mm-hmm.
don't like Jews. They don't want to live amongst us. They
Mm-hmm.
just took off and left. So that serves the narrative. Now these Palestinians were clubbed under the Arabs of Israel. When they say Arab Israel or the Arabs in Israel, we have an Arab community that also came from Yemen, from Iraq, from Syria, from Egypt, from wherever, Morocco. They got clubbed under them. And then Arabs of Israel, and especially the ones with Palestinian, like they are originally Palestinian,
Yeah.
are second class or third class citizens. They're not treated equally, but they do hold an Israeli citizenship, but they're not treated the same. So that's the third type. And then we have our fourth type, which is the ones that chose to go to neighboring countries like Jordan, like Syria, like Lebanon. And a lot of these ended up, especially in Lebanon and Syria, but more so in Lebanon, they ended up having the refugee status for their children, and then their children, and it's been passed on generation after generation. Because of when we spoke about the guardianship from Jordan over the West Bank, that helped a little with the Palestinians there because
Right.
they had
To give them an
passports.
identity, yes.
Yeah, to
And
give
then
them
that,
to
yes, I often talk about that, how that gives them, like you still have to travel with a visa pretty much everywhere, but it's much easier to travel through the world.
with a
And you're
passport.
recognized as a human being, right? Because you
Absolutely.
have a passport, you have an identity.
So,
It,
and because of this, we have a fifth type, which are the Palestinians that have other nationalities, which is like the ones that have the Jordanian nationality, and also even if we were to look at it now, some of them had families or relatives that are living in Europe, that are living in the States from back then. So just like now you see if there's, let's say, a family living in Gaza and they have, living in Canada and they have relatives in Gaza, you see them try to move mountains to try to get them or get somebody from that family out of Gaza so that they can go to Canada and get treatment or some sort of safety if they're a child that have lost their parents. So we had Palestinians that also ended up going to relatives abroad, or they were married to someone that was a non-Palestinian Westerner. So they ended up having Western passports, or they applied for immigration to go to some other, Western country and ended up getting that passport. But this is because of the length. It didn't happen straight away. It happened after years and years of post 1948 and 1967. And then the last type is the people that are from Jerusalem and specifically East Jerusalem, because even Jerusalem is
split.
segregated. Yeah, it's split.
Yeah.
And these are the in-betweeners. And by that, I mean that people from Jerusalem, East Jerusalem, were given by the Israeli government permanent residencies, but they're also given temporary Jordanian passports for ease of travel. But they are not full-on Jordanian citizens, and they are not citizens of Israel. They're just hanging in between. And because they live in such a holy, touristic, from Israel's perspective, area of Palestine, they are always made to pay very high taxes, and then they are given a lot of unjust rules, although they have Israeli citizenship, Israeli residency. So things like, if a father is, let's say, out not in Jerusalem, and his wife goes into early labor, and she goes and delivers in the hospital, they would tell him, your baby cannot be registered and cannot have a permanent residency, because when he was born, you were not in the Jerusalem area, you were in some other area of Palestine, or you were out in Jordan, or so they try to make it so hard for them, and come up with all these different rules so as they can decrease the number of people that are living in East Jerusalem legally, as much as possible. So type 6 are I call them the in-betweeners. And yeah.
Yeah, and just as you say all of that, I'm just all these memories flooding back, because I got to visit Palestine and East Jerusalem for the first time when I was 42 years old. So again, we talked about how, depending on what subtype you are, it really depends on the movement, whether you're from the diaspora or whether you're in, because the country is split into 3 zones.
Yes.
And we all grew up in the diaspora hearing stories. I think that was obviously not, I know that was a way to keep our culture alive, to help generation, like our generation. Our parents were keeping us, and grandparents keeping us connected to our land, to our ancestry. But I have to say, a lot of shame came up for me when I visited Palestine, because I really thought I knew a lot, but it's impossible to know it all just based on stories. And, simple things like, or, feeling quite ignorant. Just before I was traveling, I thought, yeah, okay, I can land in Tel Aviv. And I have the blessing of having a foreign passport through my mother, because I am half Croatian, half Palestinian. And I thought, okay, I'll just land. I was supposed to go and meet my group in Bethlehem. And then I started doing my research and realized you can't just, get into a taxi or a bus and go from Tel Aviv, which is Israel, to the West Bank. And I was arriving quite late at night. So even taking a bus on my own was not an option, because I wouldn't be able to get to the checkpoint until 1 or 2 in the morning. And I didn't feel comfortable doing that. It was a whole logistical
nightmare.
I want to say nightmare. Thank you. And so it was very eye-opening for me to even just figure that part out. And then I went to Bethlehem, but I didn't want to miss the opportunity of seeing East Jerusalem. So then having to go through the checkpoint and really getting a feel for what it is like every single day for a Palestinian, whether they just want to go and get paracetamol, whether they want to send their kid to school, to go through that every single day. And, I almost felt, I obviously don't look like a Palestinian. I get away with looking Western. The stereotype. So it was a really interesting experience for me to sit on a bus, going to Jerusalem and just being the observer and watching all of that. So it is, thank you again for elaborating on all the types. It's just one of the layers of occupation.
there's so much, and even if we can like speak for hours and hours, it's 76 years, and there's also a lot of backstories, before the 76 years. There's a lot of stuff happening on the world stage. So,
Mm-hmm.
all of that, of course, is going to,
Mm-hmm.
trickle and make it even more and more and more layered. So,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
then that's the whole point of this conversation, because you're going to meet all the different types. You're going to be speaking to
Yeah,
different types, and you're going to see, your listeners
yeah,
are going to see that we have different stories and different
yeah.
experiences.
Absolutely. And same when I was traveling in Turkey one summer, I met Palestinians who had Israeli citizenship. So, and again, I want to highlight just because they have Israeli citizenship, it doesn't mean that they're treated equally. They're actually still treated like second-class citizens,
Mhm.
but they have a little bit more freedom to travel. They can't
Yes.
go to places like Lebanon, or, there are certain places they cannot travel to, but that was the first time I understood that. And I was an adult, I was in my mid 20s. And, again, I was so both shocked and embarrassed that I didn't know these things, So even for us in the diaspora, we are still learning so much about what it means to be a Palestinian.
The thing is, a lot of, one of the many traumas for Palestinians actually is, yeah, and we'll talk about it. Because I used to see it with my parents. Is shh, don't talk, don't speak about it. Like, we can talk about it and share our stories,
Mm.
but like, don't share what has happened to us, because what if it hurts, it hurts you in school, or in a job, or
Mhm.
so a lot of that. So let's say someone that had the 90 that has the citizenship, also we are separated from them. We do not, if you grew up in an Arab country, you're separated from that group.
Mhm.
You don't get to really meet them. So like, we don't talk about, they don't talk about it, we don't talk about it, the ones that are from Gaza don't talk about
Mhm.
it. If they're outside, we're talking diaspora. So it's, a lot of things, you end up not knowing
Mhm.
what the
Mhm.
story of your fellow Palestinian
Mhm.
is. And that's why conversations like this are very important
Very
now.
important. And also, what I noticed when I was traveling through the West Bank is as soon as you enter the West Bank, there are these massive signs. Um, big,
Enter at your own.
if my memory serves me correct, I believe it was like in red, or some bright color, red or green, saying you are entering a danger zone. Do not come here. So all the people that come to visit the Holy Land, to visit Jerusalem, um, they're too scared to go see the West Bank. And if you
Yeah.
actually look up on the website, if you look at the Canadian Embassy or the British Embassy or the American Embassy, they are actually recommending you not to go to the West Bank. So there's this misperception that if as soon as you enter the West Bank, it's going to be really dangerous. So it's very heartbreaking because I
Dangerous
actually,
because of who? Like, is it because
yeah.
of the Palestinians or somebody
Exact,
else?
and that's another point I wanted to bring up is traveling by myself as a woman. And again, I even Palestinians don't know I'm Palestinian because of I do look more European,
Yeah.
and so they'll always ask me, "Are you Polish? Are you Russian?" And I'll turn around, I'll say, "La, ana Falastiniya,"
Yeah.
and then they all
Obviously.
just look at me. But uh, I felt really safe being there on my own, and I just want to share a very quick story because it was such a meaningful few minutes in my life when I was in Jerusalem. Uh, I was walking around, and one man came and grabbed my hand, and he said, "Come, I want to." We were chatting, and I told him I was Palestinian, and he wanted to take me somewhere. And I looked at him and I said, I'm not on a tour. I don't want to pay for a tour. I'm going back to Bethlehem. And he's like, I don't want to take any money from you. I just want to show you something. So there was a school, I believe it used to be a German school, or a hospital or something, and it's turned into a hotel. Anyway, he took me to the rooftop to show me the whole view of Jerusalem, which was absolutely breathtaking. And he stepped aside and just gave me some time to soak it all in, to digest it all. And I just turned around and I looked at him and I was like, thank you so much. And he said, isn't it beautiful? And I was so grateful. But I normally wouldn't do that traveling on my own. It's not, I would always tell my daughter, don't you dare ever,
Yeah,
just go with some
exactly.
random stranger in a place that you don't know. And I felt that wherever I went, when I was struggling to find transportation to get from Jerusalem to the West Bank and then back from the West Bank to get to Tel Aviv airport, it was just a community of people. Okay, don't worry, and you take care of her, and I'm gonna find you someone that can take her. You take very good care of her. And I was just like, this is absolutely incredible. And I wish more people could go and visit, or if they go, because I have friends from the West who have went, but they just stick to the Israeli side. They will not
Yeah,
go to the West Bank, or even they stick to West Jerusalem, not East Jerusalem.
Jerusalem. Yes, of
And
course.
and I had a friend who was like me, Palestinian from the diaspora, who visited, and I think also the taxi driver was Israeli and didn't know she was Palestinian, and she was staying in a hotel in East Jerusalem, and he was like, you shouldn't stay there, it's very dangerous. And that's not the case at all. So I mean, of course
Absolutely.
there are tensions, and usually during the Arab religious festivals, or if
Or
it's
the
Eid
Jewish,
or
or the
Easter.
Jewish,
Yeah,
or the Jewish religious stuff.
yeah, yeah.
Uh, I mean, I've been, I've, I've been to West Bank actually twice, but once where I actually remember it the first time I was a baby, and I have no memory of it. But then me from the West Bank, I'm not allowed to even go to East Jerusalem. Like I'm not allowed
Hmm.
to even to that dangerous zone that you're talking about. I'm not allowed to go there even.
Yeah.
So and my experience is completely different in the way I entered, but then the people, it's very similar, if not the same, as to the same feeling that I have for the people that I met
Hmm.
over there.
Yeah, and I remember that being a point of heartbreak for me, being in Bethlehem. Bethlehem stole my heart. I absolutely loved it there, and all the people, um, and the hospitality and the generosity and the warmth, and their incredible stamina to get up every day and smile and keep going. But there was a point where we were driving, you could see Jerusalem,
Yeah,
and
but you're not allowed.
the man that was driving me had never went, and he said that that was his dream in life. He just wanted to spend a day in Jerusalem. And that was, my heart shattered when I heard that. And he applied, I believe, over 40 times over his lifetime and got denied every single time.
Yeah, I think it gets easier after, I can't remember if it was 60 or 70. There's an age where it gets easier to apply if you get to that age, that is, to
Mm.
apply and be able to go. But
Hmm. And
um,
even when you go, it's a certain time. You can't just go
yeah,
and be
yeah,
free.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
they
yeah,
allocate a time for
yeah,
you to go, and then you don't know how long it might take through the checkpoint. So it's again just
absolutely.
layers and layers.